Okay, we're kicking off, and we're going to start with everyone on stage. These are our speakers. We're going to talk about product stewardship, but we're going to also have a little bit of a conversation about extended producer responsibility because they're not the same things the more I look at it. So let's have a chat. We're going to lead off with all of our speakers doing a quick bit about who they are, and then we're going to have a conversation with them about stewardship in Australia. They don't know that yet, but anyway, I've been thinking about it a lot lately. And it's also a chance for you guys to have a conversation and ask questions about schemes and thinking going forward. So our panel today is Kylie, Libby, Liam, Robert and Troy. And I think a lot of you probably don't know Troy because you're kind of newish to our sector, aren't you? So it's always great that we get some different people along to talk about what we're doing. All right, so why are we here? A bit of context. We know that we generate about 74 million tonnes of waste annually in Australia, and we're recovering about 63% of that. In my view, we've probably dealt with the easy stuff. We had a lot of conversations next door about, and this all comes from National Waste Data 2022, we're really not great in Australia at the policy setting. Like, it was really interesting this morning talking about products versus materials. We saw Anne talk about MSW and a bit of C&I. We don't really grapple, and we definitely haven't at a policy level grappled with C&D, C&I and MSW, and then we heard Joanne talk about materials across streams, right? We still very think household, business, construction, whereas what you see in Europe is a lot more product streams. So Joanne gave you his 5, bio, etc. EU looks across streams, so they don't look at C&D, C&I. We still talk materials, but then we still then go and act about interventions, very much MSW and C&I. You can see down the bottom here, the material streams we capture on the bottom right and the recovery rates. So we know that a lot of, I think it's like 40% of materials is construction and demolition. Dry aggregates, arguably easier to recover than some of the other products that go through MSW and C&I. And we don't have producer responsibility in many things, as we know. And back to my gripe about Coastal being at the end levy and on our sector and not those who generate it, right? So if we want to pivot, in my view, we got to pivot away from thinking everything's going to go in a bin somewhere. Let's all rush to chuck everything in curbside, and that's not going to happen. And start actually creating generator responsibility in how we do actually make generators responsible for creating the systems and thinking and funding to recover, but more importantly, to design in order that it can be reused, repaired and recovered. We get away with a lot in Australia of just saying it's someone else's problem, and I think that day has passed. I'm going to bang on about Earth Overshoot Day, April 5. It's not good. It's not something I'm proud of, that we keep consuming too many planets. And something that I don't think we talk enough about is sustainable development goals. We kind of went through this period about 5-6 years ago talking about them a lot, and then I think we realised they're just really hard and we stopped talking about them. But SDG 12 is actually about sustainable production and consumption, another one of the things I keep talking about, because it's actually about producers using enough materials, not too much, and making sure they're designed for longer. But the other thing that also gets lost in some of this stuff is about just transition. We never talk about just transition. And in a time of cost of living crisis and challenges, we actually need to think about how we make the shift to greater generator responsibility, reduced material use, that helps all, not just the wealthy, right? And Australia is a wealthy country, can't keep exporting, can't keep thinking we've got plenty of it, and can't keep thinking that because we've got lots of space we can landfill it. So we just really need to shift the paradigm. And so I want to talk a bit about moving from material stream to products and stewardship, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Was that a good segue? Because I thought about it. Right. So back to why we're here. We only have one mandatory stewardship scheme in Australia, which is used oil, and I use this one all the time because it makes me bloody excited, because guess what? It deals with imports as well. How many times do we hear that we can't deal with imports in Australia? Well, guess what? We can, and we do. And the used oil scheme is also linked to the taxation system, which is an amazing thing, and has eco-modulation. All those things that we keep hearing we can't do, but yet we have a scheme that's doing that. So I get very excited. We have a number of co-regulatory schemes, and we've got guys here today who are going to talk through what they're doing that gives a sense. And these are the ones that I took off the DQ website, so I'm assuming it's correct. And we also have Minister's priority list, where we start to put, what did she call it, Carly? The naughty list. The Minister called them the naughty list. I would be far happier if we had something like a waste directives framework so everyone took responsibility rather than just having to go on the naughty list. So we're going to walk through a little bit about the two schemes and I guess, all the schemes that we've got today. But just before we get to that, I want to just share this definition that I came across this week. I'm constantly reading, I'm sure you all are, because we love our sector. And I actually intermingle extended producer responsibility with product stewardship. And I came across a white paper that the Centre of Excellence did and released a month ago, how dare they without telling me, and it actually split up EPR and product stewardship in the sense of EPR tends to focus very much on end of life and collection, and product stewardship much more on looking at full supply chain. So I want to challenge you in thinking as we talk through the schemes that you're about to hear about, which ones are EPR and which ones are product stewardship, and where do we need to be to achieve what we need to as far as resource efficiency, carbon mitigation, biodiversity loss. All right, so I think they're quite different, and I'll be keen to have a conversation with you at the end to see if you think the same. Carly, you are on the naughty list, and you get to lead off. That wasn't my words, that was the Minister who said that.
Yeah, within the first 10 minutes of her presentation at the Stewardship.
And Carly's like, I'm here, I'm naughty.
It's me, hi, I'm the problem.
There you go.
Thank you.
Where am I going to go? I'm going to go.
Hi, I'm Kylie Roberts-Frost. I recently took over at the end of last year the mattress and bedding stewardship scheme. Gail asked us to talk a little bit about ourselves as well, so I will. And the first thing I'm going to preface it with is I always feel like a bit of a fraud coming and speaking at sustainability conferences. And I like to confess straight up that when I had my third child, even though I talk to you all about sustainability, I drive a huge old Land Rover and I use disposable nappies. So, I think what's really important in any discussion we have around stewardship and around waste is that we don't need 6 people doing it perfectly in Australia. We need 26 million people doing it a hell of a lot better than they are today. So from a scheme perspective, when we look at things, we try and look at, not letting perfect be the enemy of good. My background prior to this role was working for Soft Landing, a mattress recycler in the ACT. Prior to that, I spent 15 years in shipping and logistics, working in Australia, Copenhagen, Singapore, and the Middle East. So you will hear me talk a lot about logistics because quite often in this country, what we actually have is a logistics problem. We have things in places where they can't be used, and it costs a lot of money from people who quite often don't have a lot of money to try and get them to consolidation hubs. So that will be something I speak on quite a bit. Going straight to one of the first points, we are a voluntary stewardship scheme. We're industry-led. So what that means is that we have a mandate from the department. We are on the Minister's naughty list, but we're led by industry. So the expectation is that as an industry, we will start to solve this problem. We can talk about the effectiveness of that as we go through. We are led by an industry board. We're a relatively new scheme, so we've only been around for a couple of years, whereas tyres and batteries have got a much longer leadway. Part of the reason we exist is because we get rid of 1.8 million mattresses in this country every year, and if you laid them out end to end, it would take you from Darwin to Hobart. Under the current design of our scheme, we are only collecting a levy on less than 0.1% of those mattresses. So that's not solving the problem. What we need to do is figure out how, over the next few years, we can get to a point that we are really looking end to end and cradle to cradle, not cradle to grave, and what needs to be true for that to happen. So what I'll go on now is the challenges, of which there are many, and I think one of the key things we've found as a scheme, and this is the real chicken and egg discussion about voluntary versus mandatory. Quite often, and we certainly did this, we've designed in the initial stages a really, really wonderful scheme that'll work perfectly when we're regulated, but we're not regulated. So to design a scheme for regulation isn't what's going to work for a voluntary scheme. We need to do things a little bit differently. We need to be a little bit creative. Part of that was going through and saying, okay, we're not going to get a $10 flat levy. We're not going to get a $50 levy. We can't include recycling. We can't pay rebates to recyclers until we get some money. We can't do research until we get money. So the key question becomes, how do we get money to start delivering value so that the industry and the recyclers in every stage of the value chain can see the value in working with us and what we're doing? So we've made some changes there. Another big pain point we hit is we just need more recyclers. If you get us more recyclers, this problem goes away. 1.8 million mattresses a year. We cannot recycle our way out of this. We must have discussions around consumption, around designing for longevity, and around what that looks like. Logistics and geography, I think, is a huge, huge challenge. And what's a problem for me is, in the same way, a problem for Livy, it's a problem for Lena over at Tyres, and it's something that we can look at cross-industry. If I'm trying to solve a logistics problem in Mudgee and Walgett and Kununurra, so is every other scheme. And we need to work together on how we kind of make use of backhaul, work with reverse logistics. I'm a big believer that we can get stuff there. Every big box retailer in this country in a regional town is doing deliveries every week. And I guarantee you those trucks are heading back empty. So we need to figure out how we use that from a waste perspective. It's good for carbon emissions. It's good for, it's good for schemes. It's far better for resource recovery, because we know that it is much easier to recycle in urban metropolitan areas than it is if you're in a regional area. So we need to make that accessible across the board. Another really, really big one, and this is very particular to my industry, is, we can't reuse a mattress. How many of you guys stayed in a hotel last night? Yeah? Do you reckon they steam cleaned it before you got on it? They definitely didn't. That's a discussion. I promise you, after working in a mattress recycler for 4 years, the first thing I do every hotel I go to is lift up that sheet and have a good look at that mattress. Sometimes I wish I didn't. We need to have a really serious conversation about reuse in this country and what that looks like. We have this ick factor around, I don't want to sleep on a used mattress. But as a recycler, for me to see a comfort return, like use it for 90 days, you don't like it, send it back. To see this nearly new mattress turn up at a recycler to be stripped down and only recover at most 70% of its parts, that is not a win for sustainability, not in any stretch of the imagination. And it's not a win for the social outcomes in this country. We have a charity in Sydney, Relove. I don't know if you've heard of them. Ren and her team are putting 80 women and their families a week, looking for 80 beds a week to go into houses with women who are leaving domestic violence shelters. They're going into their own home. They've got nothing. They need beds for them, beds for their kids. 80 beds a week. She is one charity in one city. So that is the connection that we need to make. We need to figure out how to link up what we have with those who don't have it and make full use of products before they get to their end of life. Another big one for us is a lack of markets. And I've heard this said a lot over this conference, and I know I'm preaching to the choir a little bit, but it can't go unsaid, is there's a lot of things that are recyclable. Whether they are economically and practically recyclable in this country is a very, very different discussion. Whether it's memory foam, whether it's pocket springs, there's a lot of elements. We've got Australian steel scrappies now. They don't even want baled steel. If our recyclers can't shred it, they don't want it. It's got to be exported overseas while they'll accept baled steel. To me, this seems a little bit ridiculous. We've got to get better visibility and clarity, or if the investment needs to happen, what do we need to change so then it becomes possible for all our recyclers to have shredders, or to get them to a point where they can be shredded? Or do our scrappies really need shredded steel, or do they just prefer it? And how do we have those conversations? It's always really depressing when I go through this slide. But that said, data is our last big hurdle. We have data that we've done stocks and flows reports, I've trolled through ABS statistics. I know at an LGA level, I could walk into the waste manager at any council in this country and they would be able to tell me how many mattresses they get in. But I can't get that on a consolidated level. So we have what we think to be true. I think across, and it's, on our scheme particularly, there's a lot more data we need to uncover around what is actually happening, what's happening in the commercial space, what's happening with hotels. There's a lot that we don't know, and a lot of what we do is based on assumptions, good assumptions and knowledgeable assumptions, but we just don't have the track record of data that we really need to start making some good decisions. That said, it's not all doom and gloom. We do have a really good team working for us, and this is our strategy. Moving our industry from understanding that we can't just recycle our way out of this. There is so much more to what we do, and there is a social impact piece to what we do. I think part of being a good product steward is understanding that products need to be designed to be fit for purpose for everyone in our community, not just people who are retail consumers in Sydney, but everyone in this country uses a mattress. Whether you are a rough sleeper, whether you are living on a remote community in Europunga or the Northern Territory, we need to make sure that we have products that go across the whole stream and that they're appropriate for everyone and that they can be made to be recycled at the end of their life, to be reused, and that encompasses a lot more than just us helping with rebates and building recyclers. We need to look at how we design mattresses. We need to look around chemicals of concern. We can track. We know every single mattress that is imported into this country. You have to fill out a customs manifest and it goes down to an HS10 level and it says mattresses of cellular foam or rubber, mattresses of non-cellular foam or rubber. So we know exactly what's coming in, and what we need to do is start figuring out and advocating with government, well, what makes a good mattress? How do we know that we've made a good product? What are the chemicals we need to be concerned about? But all of that is a huge research piece that requires funding. So if we don't get the members and the buy-in from the industry, we don't have the money to fund those schemes. Looking at reuse, I think, is really, really important. It's a missing element in this country and we need to figure out what needs to be true. One of our members, Koala, does it really well. You see a bit of an uptick in things like second home, making donations to charities, but there's a lot of sort of old bricks and mortar mentality around reuse that we've got to work through. We've got to figure out, how do you steam clean a mattress? Is it going to be economically viable to strip off the outer quilted layers, replace the steam clean, UV treat, and then resew a new textile layer on? We need to do that work. Recycling is one of my favourite things. I love recycling, but we can't rely on it to solve this. There's a huge CapEx investment required to do recycling really well for mattresses. I found a wonderful machine that can deal with pocket coils. It's $1.6 million. And as all of you would know, in this country, you are Veolia or you're quite a small operator. So it's really hard if you're a small operator dealing with mattresses in a regional area. You can't buy a $1.6 million piece of machinery. So where do we centralise that? How do we, as a scheme, help facilitate that and have 3 up and down the East Coast that's accessible to all our accredited recyclers? I also am a big believer in that part of our role as a scheme is to audit those recyclers. Are you doing what you're saying you're doing? Okay, show me the invoices, show me who you're selling it to. The next part, which we can't afford yet, but is on our longer term horizon, is around foreign markets. We need to make sure that if you are selling your baled steel overseas, well, what's happening over there? We need to do that check and make sure that what we believe to be true is actually true. I worked in shipping for a long time, and I know that it's not always as easy to regulate in this space as in foreign markets as it is potentially here. And sometimes we don't even do a very good job of it here. Last one, of course, is just rethinking around what we do. We need to advocate to government. We need to get them to understand the things that need to be true for us to do really well. Even though I'm on the Minister's naughty list at the moment, I'm hoping that over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, we can change that and we can start to show some really good outcomes. But it requires a big consumer piece as well. We need to start working with consumers so they understand what it means. What does a good mattress look like? And then what's the best thing you can do to it to extend its life and then make the best use of the resources at the end of it. And that's it.
I'm so glad you came to this conference because we really need to help you meet people from Solo, JJ's, Cleanaway and Regroup and many others because there's not just Veolia in this sector. All right, so our next speaker is Libby Chaplin from B-Cycle, who's going to walk us through what's happening with batteries and B-Cycle because batteries are literally a hot topic, excuse the pun, right now for this sector.
Thank you, everybody. Maybe put your hands up if you've heard of B-Cycle before. I'm very pleased with that one. If you're a B-Cycle accredited organisation, excellent. We need to do better there, but that's a really good start. So B-Cycle's been around for just over 2 years now. But it's been a bit of a journey for me to get from here, from my first touching a battery for recycling, which happened, I think, in 2009, when I was working in the US and asked to write a standard for the stewards program, which was one of the most highly regarded stewardship schemes for e-waste. And from that time, spent 15 years working there with recyclers, implementing systems. I probably implemented 20 systems with recyclers. We rewrote the standards and audited many of those companies, and also did oversight work for the US EPA to really look at those recycling operations and ensure that they were, in fact, doing what they say they were doing. B-Cycle is a not-for-profit organisation. We're accredited by the federal government as a voluntary product stewardship arrangement, and we're authorised by the ACCC. You're doing it for me. Thank you.
Just because you're pressing your iPad doesn't make it work.
I would have figured it out shortly. The way it works. You can continue. The way it works is there is a levy put on the batteries voluntarily at the point of import. That levy is then passed on by retailers in the price of the product. And they also, importantly, agree to sell accredited brands. And so that's been a really important piece for driving participation in our scheme. The member-to-member agreement allows that kind of anti-competitive behaviour of giving a purchasing priority to other accredited schemes. Drop-off points commit to a code of practice to ensure that we have safe drop-off points, and then rebates are paid to our accredited collectors, sorters and recyclers. And then we oversee that process, excuse me, through a series, through independent audits of that process, and BSC provides the governance there. So this is sort of our snapshot by the numbers. We now actually have 57 importers participating, thank you, which is about 90% of the loose battery market, which is an amazing outcome for a voluntary scheme. We have about 60% of the power tool market and 3% of the e-bike market. And that's where you start to see some of the challenges that we face. As we need to move into new battery products, engaging new players is actually a huge challenge. We have 32 accredited retailers, 9 accredited collectors and recyclers, and I see Ecobat over there. We have, this financial year, raised about just over 16 million in levies, and 13.5 so far have been paid out in rebates. Because of the way our scheme operates, it's quite different to other schemes in that we use an accreditation model. It's meant that we've been quickly able to ramp up the number of drop-off points, and we now, at launch it was less than 1,000, now it's more than 5,000, and that involves 245 individual entities, but not over 900 individual organisations. So it's a huge network that we're able to leverage for communications and other aspects of the scheme. Since launch, we've collected over 220 million individual batteries and over 5,000 tonnes of batteries. And if we compare the first quarter of FY23 and FY24, you'll see we've increased from 1,700 tonnes to about just over 2,000 tonnes. At the middle of last year, we had a collection rate of 12%, and of that, about a 70% recovery rate. And 12%, while it's not a bad outcome for a young scheme, because of the risk profile of batteries, we just think that that needs to totally be shifted. So we're doing a lot of work to really focus in on how do we do that. There are some key challenges that we have to deal with, and one of them is free riders, and particularly when we're moving into new sectors like e-bikes, which does have a high risk factor. It takes a lot of energy and time for a small team to do that. So really important that we have an all-in producer responsibility. I think the other thing is that not all products are equal, not all batteries are equal. You know, some of them are more dangerous than others, and also some of them have much lower quality than others. And so how do we fix that problem, and particularly when we have such a challenging environment around online sales? We also are needing a cultural shift around transparency and supply chain due diligence, accountability. Obviously, behavioural change is a key activity too. We've got 5,000 collection points, but do enough people know about them? So that's definitely some key work that Cara from my team is working on, and it's a really important piece of work that needs to be done. We also obviously work with conformance to our accreditation requirements, and that's quite different to compliance. Compliance is absolutely a fundamental, but conformance means, do we have the management systems in place to deliver these outcomes in a verifiable and sustainable way? And that requires data sharing really across the whole supply chain, and that's a really important piece so that we can really see what's going on, that we can demonstrate that the recycling and recovery outcomes that we're reporting on are actually real. But overall, I think what we're really needing is a changed economic mindset, and we heard a little bit about that this morning, but how do we really move to a circular economy so that we're really not just binning it, we're seeing these materials as a resource, and batteries are a great opportunity for that because they are highly recyclable. But how do we really start to look at building schemes that are really well-resourced to build in safety and circularity, and also deliver high-value environmental and sustainability outcomes onshore. So our approach right now is to look at what we've done for the first 2 years and really learn from that. And a key piece of that means that we're recommending 2 pathways forward. One is to have regulatory reform so that we really do require participation from all of the importers in a scheme. And that we have the ability to have eco-modulated levies so that we can really focus in on the risks for different types of batteries and different issues associated with that, and also link those levies to sustainability outcomes and have a level of accountability. We see light regulation as a really important piece. We look at, when I came back from the US after 15 years away, the first government meeting I went to was a review of the NTCRS, so that was the beginning of 2017, and nothing has changed, even though everybody knew there were significant problems. So how do we create regulation that's flexible enough that we can, as industry, deliver on the accountability, on the objectives that we want to achieve as a community, without having burdensome, inflexible regulation. But so give industry the mandate to make change and then hold them accountable for that. I think that's probably enough for now.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Libby. And I know we want to drill into batteries a bit because it's such an important topic for us, but we'll keep moving for now. Our next speaker is Liam O'Keefe. Sorry, that frog's catchy. From the Packaging Covenant. Welcome, Liam. There you go. I need to get better at that. I think Bob's going to do me out of the job.
Thanks, Gail. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As Gail said, my name's Liam O'Keefe. I'm the head of Stewardship at APCO, the Australian Packaging Covenant. Previously, prior to starting at APCO, I worked at Tyres Stewardship Australia for about 7 years, so have familiarity with stewardship and extended producer responsibility from that, still keep an eye on what's going on in that sector. I think the changes that are happening across the sector are pertinent to each individual stream, but reflective of changes that are happening nationally, and it's an important step change that needs to happen. And previously I'd worked in local government for a few years in Victoria. But the reason I'm here today really is to talk about packaging, obviously, and Gail threw some questions for us to talk about, which, who the organisation is, how it's structured, how it's performing, and what needs to be done. I think what I'm going to put forward to you today is that packaging stewardship in Australia is underperforming. It needs to be better. It's not delivering the outcomes that community, council, government, brand owners, everybody expects. And industry needs to step up in regard to that. Industry needs to take responsibility for the materials that it's placing on market, and support councils, resource recovery sector in contributing financially to delivering the outcomes that the community expects. I think that's the main point. And one final point with that is that there's a lot of change happening at APCO. Chris Foley's the new CEO. He's been very direct in asking some challenging questions. He just did a roadshow around Australia at 4 different cities, getting feedback from brand members it is catching, live feed, anyway, live voting from members, and the resounding response from brand owners that put material on market was, yeah, we need to take responsibility. Around 70% of them acknowledge that eco-modulation and payment from brand owners is important to improving the system, and that an all-in, no free rider scheme that compels brand owners to pay is also necessary. And 90% of brand owners said that. So look, that's an important change. I'm going through my presentation before I've already done it, but that's the message here, is that then more money needs to be directed to local government and the resource recovery sector to do the job that it does, and it shouldn't be up to council to pay for what brand owners put on market. Okay. Well, that's unexpected. Anyway, so the other question is, what is the structure for APCO? And it is quite opaque, and I think that lack of clarity leads to many of the issues that the underperformance, which we'll talk about a little bit later. APCO is regulated in the sense that there's a National Environment Protection Measure, the NEPM, which was formed in 1998, and it establishes the covenant and requirements for brand owners to work through APCO with all levels of government in quite a convoluted working mechanism. So brand owners can either join APCO or meet their obligations independently with each state authority. And that creates a lot of conjecture. So in a sense, it's a regulated scheme, but it's voluntary to work with APCO. So that lack of clarity creates a lot of opportunity for free riders, and it makes it difficult for APCO to crack down on non-performing businesses, because they say, actually, well, I'll just go. And if it's not enforced by state government or government that they need to participate, then they are free riders, and it kind of inhibits APCO's ability to hold business, brand members to account. That's the main point I'd make with regard to that. But one other thing I'd say is the question that Gail asked earlier was the relative difference between EPR and extended producer responsibility and product stewardship. I would categorise APCO now as a product stewardship organisation, because it really is brand owner focused. It does the ARL, Australasian Recycling Logo, those types of the sustainable packaging guidelines, which are going to be regulated and need to be regulated by the federal government. But that is dealing at a soft design level. Extended producer responsibility is paying for the collection and recovery of materials, which ultimately is what councils are doing. So I think what APCO is doing is seeking to more for transition from being a voluntary, a stewardship organisation to an EPR organisation that contributes financially to the collection and recovery. So just to refer to your point there, Gail. So I talked about the opaque and kind of difficult to administer system that the NEPM is, and what does it mean in terms of performance? Well, it's underperforming. The sector needs to improve. I don't need to tell people here in this room that that's the case. With the NPTs and national packaging targets represent that fact. The target one is 100% of material placed on market is reusable, compostable, recyclable. That's at 84% currently. There's a lot of work to get to that final 16%. Target 2 refers to 70% of plastic packaging is recycled. This is probably the big elephant in the room in terms of performance. Sorry, that says 20%, should be 18%, which is a long way from the 70% that is required. Only 7% of flexible plastics are recycled and about 26% of rigids. Recycled content, again, that's around 39-40%, but that's mostly paper, cardboard and glass. The biggest challenge with plastics, when you look at it, flexible plastics only 1.5%, so there's a lot of room for improvement there, and rigid plastics similarly a low amount. And then the final point is around the elimination of problematic materials, which is around 33% of elimination of problematic materials since the baseline in 2017-18. And efforts are underway to eliminate that, such as with expanded polystyrene and many other problematic materials. But again, that's another example where EPR, extended producer responsibility, can step in. If you do have problematic materials and we need to use them, brand owners need to pay for the collection and recovery of that if they're deriving a benefit from selling it into the market. The other elements that were picked up from the NPT review is that we need a vision, which is part of what Chris is doing with the roadshow and getting brand owners on board. And working with government in that regard. We have to strengthen collaboration across the supply chain. The point I made about APCO currently being just brand owner focused, it needs to engage and pay for collection and recovery with councils and the resource recovery sector. That needs to change. And material specific interventions are required because it's complex. Okay. So the need for change, we all know it needs to change. The federal government's taking leadership, which is great, in terms of the environment ministers agreeing that you need mandate packaging design, so it's not sustainable packaging guidelines, it's requirements. That setting minimum recycled content to drive that recovered processed material back into new packaging, create demand for Australian, through the investment of Australian processors, and prohibit harmful chemicals and chemicals of concern. So we welcome that. I think it needs to happen, but that's not going to solve the problem. What is going to solve the problem is the fact that there's an economic gap. Potentially initial modelling is looking at 250 or 300 million and up to 700 million, which would need to be paid by brand owners to councils and resource recovery sector to enable the achievement of the national packaging targets. But there's a lot to work through in that regard. Obviously, it's complex and there's a lot of stakeholders to engage. But I think the acknowledgement is that APCO and the brands need to generate the revenue to enable that. The final point I'll leave it on is to say that, to articulate is that there is a change within the organisation that to deliver on the packaging targets, it requires a transformation of the way packaging stewardship operates in Australia because it's not doing what it needs to do. And we seek to be proactive in that regard and to be a contributor to the conversation and dialogue with government, resource recovery sector and councils to work towards that. It needs money, it needs economic gaps, all the intent is good, and brand owners need to pay that. And to close the gaps, we need mechanisms to allocate that. Libby talked earlier about eco-modulated fees being one of the mechanisms to do that, and we would reiterate that provide eco-modulated fees essentially just means charging brand owners for the material that they place on market and differentiating it relative to the cost associated with the collection of recovery of that. The beauty of that is that it provides financial incentive money to the resource recovery sector, but it also means that if there's certain design elements that a brand owner might choose because of the nature of their product, that they pay additional to that for the burden that places on the resource recovery sector. So it's a fairer way to distribute the costs across the supply chain. So that's the main points from me. I think really the main point is that it's time for the brand owners to step up and contribute. One more point is that this this is the first time that this has really been spoken about in a public forum. The roadshows have been happening with members, which literally finished yesterday. This is all going to be wrapped up in a process where APCO, given the convoluted processes it has with government, needs to have a strategy signed off by the Environment Ministers, which will be going to the Environment Ministers meeting in June. And then a more kind of thorough dialogue will occur with the representatives and the sectors, or into local government and the resource recovery sector. Thank you.
I'm going to be good. But Liam, I'm so glad you're here, because Anne's got data on C&I, and it's not just councils that collect material, it's also commercial. And we've seen both in South Australia with Green Industries Report, 70% that was going through the C&I sector was commercial, and Anne's, yours was pretty close actually. There was probably about 60% of what was going through C&I was packaging as well. So we actually need to understand it across the whole system and not just keep thinking, I know they decide to put everything in the yellow bin and let councils pay for it, but it's a system. We forget about hotels, hospitals, libraries, restaurants, and all those other things. Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. No, but you're not alone in that. APCO seems to only focus on that. That was my point. All right, but I'm being nice today, because I reckon, because I don't know, I just kind of go, every time we get a new CEO, it's going to get really, really better. So, Rob, I'm going to let you talk about tyres, and you're going to talk nicely. You're going to be nice as well. Rob Kelman from ATRA.
Thanks, Gail. As nice as she gets. Shiny and nice. I'm actually not from a product stewardship organisation, but I'm representing. What are you doing here? I snuck through. Fuck! I need my glasses. I can't see that.
Just make it up, you broke it.
I saw so many nodding heads when Liam was talking about $700 million per annum being redistributed out to councils. I mean, how exciting will that be? Yeah, so I do packaging policy work with Reloop, but today I'm representing the Australian Tyre Recyclers Association. Our members collect about 30 million tyres per annum for recycling. We are a member of Tyre Stewardship Australia. The collection rate, so the tyres are broken down into three categories: passenger, commercial, which is truck and bus, and then the mining tyres. They're roughly a third each. You know, a little bit of variation. The collection rate for passenger and commercial is around about 98%. The collection rate for OTRs, mining sector, is low, 13% or something. Most of them are allowed by EPAs to be buried on site. It would be good if that changed. About 90% of Australia's used tyres get processed into a tyre-derived fuel and sent offshore. Japan is a big buyer of TDF. It's co-processed in cement kilns, replaces coal. It's a good story, reduces greenhouse emissions compared to coal by 30 to 40%. It's co-processed, which means if you've ever been to a cement kiln, it all goes in together, is consumed together, and the product at the end of it, the clinker, which becomes cement, incorporates all of that. So the cement industry likes it. Look, we are not alone. Most of the world's tyres coming out of, the Netherlands or wherever get utilised in cement or high-end industrial sort of facilities. Interestingly, where I'm from, in Tassie, the first cement kiln in Australia might be starting to use TDF. They just got this massive grant to change their configuration so that they can take TDF and other alternate fuels, which is good. Why didn't that move? Here we go. So I just was going to give you a quick outline of the kind of underpinnings for the sector, for the recycling industry in Australia. There is a product stewardship scheme. Tyre Stewardship Australia collects 25-cent levy per EPU. I think that generates about $8 million or something like that per annum. They use that for R&D. There's an accreditation program. There's some marketing and data collection. probably most people aren't aware, though, that none of the 25 cents flows to the recycling industry. TSA doesn't do any recycling. That's done by the private sector. I would say that the most important underpinnings for the sector, you could argue it was a product stewardship outcome, I guess, is the regulatory underpinnings, which means that now, over the last 6 or 8 years, every state in Australia has reformed their regulatory landscape so that if you're... So I'm from Hobart, as I say. We've got this massive stockpile in Longford. It's about 1.5 million tyres. It's disgusting. It was put there legally up until about 10 years ago, right? Difficult for the EPA to now do anything about the person that put them there because they did it completely legally. There was no requirements to have an EPA licence. So they got the retailer disposal fee, $2.50 or $3 or whatever they got, took him to this bloke's farm. The guy said, yes, put him there temporarily. Everyone kind of gets told that it's going to be temporary. They're never going to move unless someone now pays for them to move, right? But that won't happen now, right? We know that in Victoria, Stawell or something like that, Numurkah, massive stockpiles, those things do not occur anymore because the regulatory underpinning around tyres, which is, my industry is all about being regulated because in the absence of regulation, you just get some dodgy bloke with a ute, no front teeth, picks up the tyres, dumps in the bush somewhere, yeah? So we want to avoid that happening. Maybe. Landfill levies are also particularly important for driving tyre recycling. Like most sectors, tyre recycling is a cost. So the $3, $4, $5 or whatever that Bob Jane is, or whoever, Bow Repairs or someone is paying the collector is the last point of income for most tyres. So out of that $4 or whatever it is, you have to do the collection, you do the transport, you do the shredding, you do the containerising and you do the export offshore, right? So what are you left with? I don't know, 10 cents, 20 cents or whatever it is per tyre. So it's not like tyres are some huge revenue source, and you know we know that that's the case probably with mattresses and all sorts of other items. We're currently engaged in a conversation. The federal government, WA, is doing some work on what a new regulatory framework might look like for tyres. We are continuing to point out, of course, that 98% of tyres are collected. We could introduce landfill bans, which would be great. I think that really landfilling will disappear because if you're paying $300 a tonne for disposal, then it's not really very attractive. And one of the framings around this is who's the generator of this waste? Retailers, fleet managers, and you know, can we establish a scheme that looks at waste generators? And you know, I'm constantly talking to EPAs about tackling those handful, really, of rogue generators that are happy to get some cousin or something or whatever it is to sort of dump the tyres on the roadside or in the bush or whatever it might be. I'm just going to finish with this. I always love this quote, right? It's from A Few Good Men, Jack Nicholson. Probably most people know the film. And he says at one point, "No, I like you Navy boys. Every time we've got to go out someplace and fight, you fellas always give us a ride." Right? It's a great... So the point around this is attribution, because it's the recyclers and the collectors that are doing the work. And I think it's important there's a reflection that the recyclers are at the centre of any product stewardship scheme. And what we see in a lot of cases at this stage is the recyclers and collectors don't have sufficient representation in the governance frameworks, often aren't accredited with, you know, having done the collections. There was a comment this morning that Tyre Stewardship Australia collects 60%. They don't do any of that collection. So, you know, and I would suggest also as a challenging idea, really there's a conflict of interest if the manufacturers are at the centre of an EPR or product stewardship scheme, there's often an incentive to avoid higher collection rates because the fees might get harder. So make sure as we are setting up product stewardship schemes where we need to set those up, because it might be that landfill bans, a much simpler mechanism, is the better thing to do than some massive, regulatory sort of underpinning. Let's make sure that recyclers are at the centre of those schemes and how they're governed. Thanks.
We can debate that later, because I think it's a supply chain. Well, it's a supply chain, right? Because if it's just recycling an end of chain, again, all we're talking about is taking it on is dealing end of life. And what we should be doing with stewardship is designing, so reuse, repair, all those other things, right? So we've got to be really clear.
Tyre is never meant to come apart. It's vulcanised together.
I didn't say we're debating it now. All right, we do have to get Troy up because he's been waiting very patiently, and he's also really new to our sector. So, new for us. Well, not yet. We'll save him. Troy Roy, founder of Resource, come and talk to us, Troy, and show you. I'm not going to put the thing on just in case. Oh, it starts. Oh no. Okay. Off you go.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. So I am not in any associations, not in any stewardship background, nothing like that. My background is as a third-generation recycler, so have been involved in predominantly the scrap metal industry, but also other sectors, lighting waste, mercury waste, various parts of the industry like that. I worked in that space up until 2016, and I made a decision ultimately to move away and do my own thing. And that was, I guess, the start of a really unique journey for me, where I made some difficult personal decisions. There were some things occurring where I worked that made me uncomfortable. And unfortunately are all too common in the recycling industry. And so I set about founding Resource with the primary concept of just doing things differently, doing things in honest, transparent manner, which may sound pretty boring, but it's unfortunately, it's not as common as it should be in the recycling industry. The way the business started was I wanted to try and find a solution for alkaline and zinc carbon batteries, ultimately developed a process to convert those batteries into fertiliser, commercialised that, I suppose, around the 2018, 2019 mark, and I started then looking at, well, what's the next biggest problem that I see in the industry? And e-waste was the one that sort of hit me. It was at that point I started looking at how do we go about setting up the most sustainable e-waste recycling company possible. So for me, what was clear was scale, the scale of the problem that exists. I'm from Victoria, but it's national. The scale of the problem is not matched by the scale of the infrastructure. And I think the UN released a report only a month or so ago that showed that e-waste is growing at 3 times the rate of recycling infrastructure. And that's globally, so that's not just here, but probably Australia's even worse. So Resource now operates out of a 15,000 square metre facility. We're the largest e-waste recycling facility in Australia. We've invested nearly $10 million now in recycling infrastructure. And that's, I guess, my core operating business. I'm also the co-founder of PV Industries, which is a solar panel recycling startup. And you probably see our building has a lot of panels on it. I'm pretty passionate about that space as well. And then I'm also the founder of GreenQuip, which sells recycling solutions into the market. So I use my knowledge, and that's how I pay for all these extensive loss-making organisations that I am passionate about ultimately. And it enables me to work with other recyclers who also want to find solutions, but perhaps don't know how to do it. So I guess that's my background. And I suppose I want to start, I probably don't have the technical terms and the knowledge that these experts do here, but as a recycler, I look at things on a more practical level. One of the more recent things, as we've opened our facility, we've started to get some really large brands come to us. And a lot of the things I've heard this morning is looking at materials and consumption as being the killer for our carbon footprint. And the thing that always comes to my mind is, why don't we just start with longer warranties? So we have a mandated 12-month warranty in this country. If you started making it 3 to 4 years minimum warranties, a lot of the products that come into our facility, the manufacturers make a conscious decision not to even look at that product. So they get it back through various customer return channels, and they simply say, you know what, it's a $19 toaster, can't be stuffed, just get rid of it. Or it's a power tool that's, we sold for $59, we'll just give them another one. That is unsustainable. That can't continue on forever. And again, I don't know how you'd implement these things, but as a recycler that sees products that come back, many of which are probably perfectly usable. They even have terms like weekend rental, which basically means someone goes to Bunnings, they use it for the weekend, and they return it. That product, just so you understand, most of the time will end up in our type of facility. It's not acceptable. That's not a sustainable system. So that's sort of my first point I'd like to make. The second one is we have to force repairability. So probably not in our interest as recyclers to have less product coming through the door, but if you force repairability and you start to encourage reuse, then you reduce the waste. But that would also tie in with, if you make more robust, more durable products that last longer, you'll also then make them probably more repairable. And for those who don't understand, when a product has thicker materials, stronger materials, it actually makes it easier for us to separate them. So size reducing and separating becomes more challenging with thinner, smaller materials. So the more durable materials we see, and I can't use brand names, but there's a particular company that has a few brands, and they have high quality, medium quality, and low quality. And we see them come through the door, and the high quality brand is all repaired by this company. And that's because it's much more robust, it's much more repairable, everything is thicker, stronger. It just makes sense that that product is repaired because it's easier for them to repair it. So making repairability forced upon manufacturers, again, no idea how that's done, but that would make a big difference. Then if we talk about, well, what happens when it gets to us, recyclers? Well, we need to make it more recyclable. We can't have products that we see two polymers fused together. That will never come apart no matter what we do as a recycler, right? You wouldn't believe how common that is. The number of products that come with embedded batteries, and I imagine that's probably going to be something we discuss later. Your fancy Bluetooth speaker that, can go underwater, and it's got this massive battery, it lasts for freaking I don't know how many hours. That is a horrific product. That is just disgusting for us to have in our recycling stream, right? It's unsafe to dismantle, it's unsafe to process, it's incredibly costly to do anything with. It's just, again, it's not sustainable. We're not forcing these manufacturers to think about what they're putting on the market and think about the effects that they're actually putting on the industry that needs to try and, in a cost-effective manner, recycle these products. And then there's circularity, and I have a lot of problem with some of the communication that's going on around circularity in this country. Circularity, so far as I'm concerned, is when, say something starts out as a glass bottle, it turns back into a glass bottle. Circularity is not taking something and turning it into construction material, right? That should be the worst case. Circularity is not taking something and turning it into energy at a giant waste-to-energy facility. That is when we give up. That's the point at which we say, we can't do anything other than that. That should be the end of the line, right? And if we can't go, if neither of those options are available, then landfill. But this concept of saying, oh yeah, we've got a really circular approach. We take this product and we put it into road base. I mean, fair income, it does my head in. Like, I just cannot fathom it. And then there's our obsession with talking about collection. Collection is not recycling. Collection is collection. We have this desire to tell everyone how much we collect and not the results of the recycling, right? And how sustainable is that recycling? Yeah, we get, 80, 90% recycling because it goes into road base. That's not the same as 80 to 90% recycling and it goes into a glass bottle, to keep going back to that example. It's just too easy, and we love the branding around maximising collection, maximising recyclability, but it's not real recyclability. It's not real recycling. We're putting it into an application that it was never meant to be. We don't dig stuff up out of the ground to throw it into road base. It's crap. Then that sort of flows into, we need to disincentivise downcycling. So if, in my case, I look at polymers are the biggest issue that we face as e-waste recyclers. So circularity is, say, an ABS polymer turning back into an ABS polymer. It is not an ABS polymer turning into energy and then we all go around telling everyone we're upcycling, or we go around telling people that we've turned it into a brick and we're upcycling. That's crap. That's not upcycling. That's the definition of downcycling. So making people accountable for the words they use, for the marketing that they put out there, that has to be part of that stewardship conversation. And then there's, well, okay, all this is great, but how do you action it? And the implementation of large-scale infrastructure in this country is just sorely lacking. We cannot keep saying, yeah, here's a $500,000 grant, we've got a 500 kilo per hour plastics recycling plant. That's not going to help anybody. We need plants doing 10, 20, 30 tonne an hour scattered around the country, right? We need to take these waste levies and we need to convert them into real recycling infrastructure, not marketing, not more research and whatever crap. We've got to actually turn it into infrastructure that changes the outcomes, right? So big infrastructure exists overseas and it exists, well, there's guys from the Netherlands here, they can tell you about some of the incredible plants that allow polymers to go directly back into polymers. Now that can't happen forever, right? There is a limited life to the number of times you can keep circling these things around, but we barely try here. We love to talk about it, but we don't actually make any action. There is no large-scale e-waste or e-plastics, as I call it, recycling plants in this country, yet we have this scheme, NTCRS, that's been around for 12, 13, I don't even know how many years, whatever, that's completely and utterly useless. It's a great, oh yeah, we've got these co-reg schemes and, they bid for the lowest price against each other, but their outcomes are atrocious. Their auditing is questionable, would be a polite way to describe it. And we just seem to think that that's okay, don't worry about it, let's just keep doing the same thing. And then there's end markets. So if you're going to build infrastructure and you're not thinking about, okay, so we've built this fantastic site and we're going to have all these lovely, 99% pure products come out of that facility, where are they going to go? So I'm involved in a solar panel recycling company, and luckily my co-founders aren't here because they kill me for saying this, but we're going to have to go into road base. I find that abhorrent. We're going to get some of the cleanest glass money can buy, and the glass guys don't want it, right? Because it's heavily doped with chemicals very specific to the solar manufacturing industry, which is fantastic. And I visited a plant in China only a few months ago that uses 170,000 tonne of glass per day. Think about that, 170,000 tonne per day of glass, and they are desperate for every kilo of solar glass that we could get our hands on. Guess what? We can't get it there. It's illegal to get it there. it's actually not Australia's fault here, but it is the Chinese borders that have just cut it all off. We need to be saying, how do we create domestic markets or international pathways so that these polymers or these glasses or whatever the products, that they have real circular pathways, real circular outcomes. That's where we need our leaders in policy to say, well, China's building the vast majority of solar glass, why don't we try and create some sort of dialogue where we can get them the glass that they want that would massively reduce all these chemicals that are being used and ensure true circularity of glass, which, by the way, is going to be the single largest e-waste stream. In fact, it'll be larger than all other e-waste streams combined by 2030. And the last one I wanted to put is, we need to stop allowing the export of recyclable materials or products under the guise of reuse. I had a meeting with a company last week. Again, I'm just out of respect, I won't say who. They said they know 80% of what they give to their downstream partner and goes overseas doesn't work. They know it as a fact, right? Yet, they're very happy because they're currently getting paid for a product that they would have to pay to recycle in this country if they actually said, we'll just only export the stuff that's reusable and we'll keep the stuff here for recycling. I'm sure they're not the only one, so that's why I'm not going to call them out, but that behaviour cannot be tolerated. It is not acceptable to take our problems and throw them overseas. Unless you've been to some of these places where the products go, then you may not understand what you're putting these countries through. And I wish I could have played a video, because I visited 5 recycling facilities in Malaysia in the second week of January this year. And I did it with a company called URT, the 3rd largest e-waste recycler in the US, and their auditor. The facilities we visited were, it was saddening. I don't know how else to say it. It was, for me, as someone who actually cares about the environment, it was an emotional experience to watch the conditions in which these people were working, to watch the way in which the water was just going out into the environment with plastics like you wouldn't believe. Let's say the video I'm referencing, it's a facility. I pan around and you can see a building that goes for probably 300 metres. It's absolutely enormous. They process about 300,000 tonne a year of plastics. And directly behind them is a river, and that river connects directly to the ocean, and there's plastics washing away into the water. So that's the environmental damage, but it's the human damage as well. The conditions in which these people were working were abhorrent. And if I had $1 for the number of times that that auditor said, oop, didn't see that, then I'd probably be retired by now, right? This is a well-regarded auditor, one of the leading auditors from the US. Now, not linked to Australia, but given what we know happens within the NCCRS, I'm pretty sure they're all one and the same. It's, again, money follows the outcomes here. So the auditors are happy, they get their money, URT are happy, they get their product in, well, they get paid basically, and they get rid of their product. So we have to create rigidity and responsibility around exporting product overseas for reuse to ensure that it actually is reused. That's it for me.
Plenty. Lots of food for thought there, and I'm very happy to say our industry doesn't work like that in Australia. All right, so big issue keeps coming up for me is genuine producer responsibility, right? Like, we're all trying to reinvent at the end of the chain an obligation we know that should be at the start of the chain. And I think all of you talked about free riders. Like, I can't, and sorry, you can have a talking stick. Is there any other way than genuine regulation making responsible to bring the girls into the yard? Because it's not happening in the absence of that, is it? Or is it?
I mean, we've managed to get a good outcome with loose batteries at 90%, but it's still not adequate. And when we're moving into new sectors and problematic products, I just think it needs to be regulated.
So
We need to have
90% of placed on market are contributing, is that right? So I'm just going to drill in a bit, but we're only getting 12% recovery. So how does that good?
I'm not saying it's a good outcome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
90% contribution.
We have only been running for 2 years, but I don't think it's a good outcome, obviously. Yeah.
But compare and contrast that to CDS, Marcus, right? Within first 6 months, 70% of containers, 60 to 70 per jurisdiction, was recovered. So 12% after 2 years compared with 60 to 70%. Big gap, right? And potentially the amount, right? So you're 4 cents a battery or kilo? How much
It's per EBU, equivalent battery unit, so every cell, really.
4 cents?
So I think we've really seen the need to move from, we had originally set up as a subsidy, so an offset to the recycling costs. I think the board is very clear now that it needs to be a cost recovery process, and so that's part of the review. How does that really work? And it's going to be a significant change, and that's the other reason why regulation is so important, because it needs to be a level playing field. The poor performers should not be the ones getting a competitive advantage.
And why would you move first? Kylie, did you have your hand up? So how many of the place on market are in your scheme?
It's about to change because we've just made some very significant changes to the scheme. But as members, based on what will come over the next couple of months, is we'll have about 50%, which is a huge improvement from where we are currently.
Where are you now? Go on, tell us. We're all friends here. No one else can say anything.
I reckon it would be less than 10 in terms of full participants, but that's why we've made some changes to the scheme. You can't have a scheme that's set up, which will work perfectly when we're regulated, when you need to, bring the masses on board. So this will make a very significant difference. We're slightly more fortunate in terms of the amount of mattresses we recover, but the heavy lifting on this is done by councils.
Literally and figuratively.
Literally heavy lifting. I don't know if you've ever lifted a mattress onto a cutting table, but it's about 80 kilos and it's not fun. So we probably, from the data we had before, I would say we were recovering through our accredited recyclers, roughly 50% diversion from landfill. That's very concentrated in certain sectors. ACT's banned mattresses from landfill. Necessity is the mother of invention. If you want to improve your diversion rates, ban them from landfill because it drives a bit of an industry behind it. I still am not comfortable with that data though. I think we're missing pieces on mine sites, on the commercial sector, and we'll do some work on that. But, it's not easy to unpack.
Liam, do you know how much coverage you guys have at APCO? No.
I don't, but I think it will be more important when eco-modulation and paying for the collection and recovery is compelled. So yes, if once that money is put to that, then you want everybody in, particularly because it'll create a greater disadvantage for those that are paying more fees relative to what the current funding model is. But generally, I think in 95% of cases, regulation is important for compelling participation. The one scheme where there might be a little bit of leeway, and is say paint, where there's maybe 5 manufacturers, well, centralised manufacturers. You've got everybody in the tent, but I think maybe there needs to be more vigilance in terms of monitoring the performance and reporting and alike. But in terms of compelling participation, it's good, but in terms of monitoring performance, that's a different question.
Now you guys can ask questions, but okay, Red Lady. But that the point of the generators, and I think that comes back to Rob's point. If it's only generators-led scheme, we have this constant challenge of not a race to the bottom to keep the prices down. So it's finding that balance, right, about how do you have the supply chain or independence at the table to get the better outcomes, right, which is the key. Yeah. Okay, so go Kylie and then Troy and then Red Lady.
I think one of the things we talk about is product stewardship is the outcome that you want. When you look at what product stewardship is, that's the outcome you're going for. EPR is a lever you use to do that, and it's not the only lever. I think it's one of the most important, because if you make it, you're responsible for it.
Take it.
Yeah. But there's other things we need to do as well from a consumer perspective too.
As in not buy shit. That's the starting point? Yeah, all right. Yeah. And all of you are going to walk out of here and never buy the $7 kettle again, are you? Promise me. Promise me? No one's going to Kmart other than me for my makeup tonight. Right, okay. Troy.
You referenced the CDS, and I think one thing that's pretty clear with the CDS is if you create a rebate, you activate a subsection of society to bring products to locations you want those products. So do we have a logistics problem in this country? Absolutely. But how can you mitigate that? You centralise the collection and you drive certain members of society to bring those products to the place you want them. And I look at when I was a kid, we used to collect aluminium cans when there was no CDS, but that was worth it for my time because the money I earned was sufficient that I was happy to do that work. So if you create a number that helps people to get a mattress or a battery, and it matches the risk, maybe in the case of a battery, and you get those batteries or those mattresses in locations that are appropriate for continuing that recycling journey, then you'll make your life a lot easier.
We can have a debate about rebates later. No, I'm not going to go there yet because the red lady is. But, we don't need a rebate on food when we're putting $2,500 in a bin. We need to change behaviour because not everything's going to have a rebate. Red lady.
Okay, red lady is Annette Brodie, founder of the Reconnect Project. First, just a very quick comment to Troy. Congratulations on being a finalist for the National Banksy Sustainability Awards for Circular Economy. Sorry, not sorry that we won.
I didn't see that coming. That was very mean, Today is a kind day.
I don't have a marketing budget. I am the marketing budget. So
I didn't say you could make a comment. Right, go.
Okay, now my question is for Libby around batteries. There's over 1,200 independent mobile phone repairers in Australia. They're the ones pulling batteries out of phones. What are they doing with their batteries? For us, as the charity that is challenging Mobile Muster as the current product stewardship scheme for mobile phones, we're saying actually we're more of a product stewardship. We're repairing, extending the life of them, focusing on the independent repair industry for circularity. What's happening with all those independent repairers, and are the importers of batteries for phones and computers and tablets included in your import numbers at the moment?
They're not part of our scope, no, unfortunately. So they're part
Short
of the
answer,
Mobile
no.
Muster scope.
Yeah. Do people realise how little bit Libby covers? Because this is part of the challenge, right? Let's have that conversation. Go.
Well, we cover all consumer batteries under 5 kilos that aren't covered by another scheme. So it's power tools and loose batteries. We're moving into e-bikes right now. So there is a definite limited scope, and it doesn't cover embedded batteries, which is obviously a massive gap.
Which is our challenge, right? Because, Gail rant, why don't we have a waste directives framework that says anything you put on market you have responsibility for, and it creates that level playing field from the get-go to say, this is what I have to do. Instead, we're doing our individual schemes and we don't map it. And we fight with Tabor and the feds and go, Tabor, please, sir, can we actually have a comprehensive scheme? He goes, no, I'm busy this day. So we end up with losing stuff, right? So we actually need to set that framework. Reverse logistics, Kylie, you just mine too, right? Because when I used to go to WA and get called a seagull, don't you have anyone local who can talk about container deposit? No, you got me. And they would go, oh, we can't get containers back to the city. And I'd be like, hang on, but you get coke in. How do you get coke out? So I think as a nation though, because I guess I don't really agree with the idea that we're going to have 20 to 30 tonne facilities everywhere because the capital costs are huge, but we can use reverse logistics and hub and spoke models, right?
Absolutely.
So how do we solve this, Kylie, for Tassie and Far North Queensland and NT?
So one of the things we need to do is talk to you, like for my scheme, I have a lot of retailers and a lot of manufacturers who are members. Now, you can go to any regional town in this country and there will be some of our members, there might be a Harvey Norman, a 40 Winks, a Snooze. They're getting deliveries every week. So those trucks are absolutely going back empty. And what we need to do as a scheme, and I see a huge part of our responsibility, is facilitating those discussions. I'm about to start working with a company called NetLogix. I've spoken to DHL, I've spoken to Cube. All the knowledge on how to do this, where hubs make sense, where you can have batteries and mattresses and textiles and solar panels and mobile phones.
We could put them on top of container deposit schemes. They're already getting a rebate rather than building some new ones. God, there's an idea.
Yes, so we have all that information exists in this country. That's how a logistics company makes money. And we need to then use that across schemes, not just me, because what's relevant for me is relevant for tyres, is relevant for batteries. So between us, we need to work on this as a national project because that is the only way we are going to get resources to where they need to be. We are not going to set up waste-to-energy plants in Walgett. You know what I mean? We are not going to have huge, big $1.6 million pocket coil machines in Mudgee. It's just not going to happen. So we need to make it easy to get it to where it needs to be and buy less shit. That too.
Gordon. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Gail.
A quick one.
Okay, so Liam, Gail...
Oh, no, not this again. This is
no,
the
it's a
third
$250,
one.
$300 million question that Gail doesn't believe is 20 years. I was there at Chris's APCO presentation yesterday. It's presented that there's $250 million to get plastic recycling packaging up into 50% recycled. There's a lot of disbelief that will happen because in 1999 APC was set up and it was an enabler and facilitator, but it had no teeth. What's different now? Can you please help us all understand why we should be hopeful and something different's going to happen this time? Thank you.
Thanks, Gordon. It's a great question. I mean, there's a number of elements to it. I think one of the most pertinent and obvious drivers is the drive from the federal government's willingness to regulate and compel activity in multiple sectors, you know, packaging, tyres, e-waste. So that drives brands, it does. You know, the ban on EPS in Western Australia pushes brand owners to remove it, and it leads. That's probably the biggest thing, but I also think it's social license to operate globally. Global Plastics Treaty, the fact that brand owners acknowledge that, one, they might try individually within to do the best they can, but you can only go so far as an individual commercial enterprise. In order to create systemic change, you need to be working collaboratively across the supply chain with multiple businesses contributing financially. So I think it's the social license to operate globally is compelling these brands and making commitments, but it's also regulation is driving it too. Those two things hand in hand, I think, are compelling action.
You've done a great job of getting the national packaging standards on the federal, so hopefully you've got the same standards getting, fingers crossed, more power to you.
Meet your only fan. All right, Annie, let's go.
So we've had issues with gas bottles for decades, and gas bottles solved their own problem by introducing the swap and go system. So all of a sudden, gas bottles just disappeared from being a problem because there was a financial incentive. You took one back, you got a discount. The same with SodaStream. You know, they've come onto the market, they've solved their own collection problems. My question, I guess, is about with the tyre recycling. If they're collecting $8 million a year and they're not contributing to collection or recycling, where is the money? Because I'm seeing all these country rural tips in Queensland that have got 7,500 tyres all lined up in rows, desperately trying not to have a fire, because if there's a fire, they've got no hope in hell of ever putting it out. So I'm just a bit frustrated, I guess, of...
We can hear that. We can hear that. This is the most animated Annie's been in ages. And I would actually dispute, Adrian, you've got some MRFs. I think, and Fiona, you've got MRFs. We're still seeing SodaStream canisters and gas bottles in MRFs because people get confused between reusable and recyclable. However, we'll keep with your happy story. Yeah. Okay, tyres is the problem now.
Please explain.
Please explain.
I've got a please explain from Anne. Yeah, look, in some regional and remote areas, so what happened, okay, COVID, anyone hear about it? Massive impact on everything, right?
You're hilarious today.
So, you know, we were paying about $1,000 a box which is a 40-foot container to move shredded tyres offshore. During COVID, it went to like $10,000, $12,000 a box. What happened then was that the retail disposal fee went from, in Queensland, some of my members were scratching around like rats for $1.60. Now it's at a much more sustainable, maybe $3.60 or something like that for Bob Jane or whoever to get rid of their tyres. But at that point, you know, it was just a fight to the bottom. What's happened though in some regional areas, suddenly these retailers are going, I used to pay $2, now I'm being charged $5, which is a sort of sustainable fee, but their tip might take them for less. Well, maybe even for free in some really remote tips. I mean, especially if the bloke that runs the tyre store, they know that the tip owner or something like this, right? You can have these kinds of situations. But it's not happening in Metro. It's not happening with the big volumes. You are seeing some of that sort of stuff at the margins. But we are still seeing pretty high collection rates for tyres generally. There are still some problems at the margins, I get that. But, you know, 7,000 tyres in a tip, it is just about price, you know, and it is about acknowledging that, you know, in terms of product stewardship, it's really interesting. Some materials, products, will be able to have a product stewardship scheme, but we don't manufacture any tyres in Australia anymore. And a tyre, as I said before, is never meant to come apart. It's vulcanised. We are never going to change the design standards of tyres to have it pull back to constituent elements, which is a sort of an aside. But I get it, there are still problems at the margins. What we're proposing is some sort of, you know, re-look at product stewardship, targets the generators of this waste, and perhaps there's some sort of scheme that's set up, some of which those funds can be attributed over to remote legacy waste recovery and some of this remote stuff.
I don't know if everyone knows Leanne Wiseman. She's sitting here looking very engaged, and she was nodding very vociferously, I don't know if that's the right word, but it sounds good, to the whole reuse and repair comment. Like, we don't have any scheme other than, I guess, Seamless, the textiles, is going to try and put reuse and repair targets in it. We are all rushing to recycling, and we're not doing enough share, repair, reuse, recycling. And arguably, the system is broken because we don't put any emphasis on it. I guess cost for me, and I hear lunches happening and you're all going to leave soon because we're growling. You know, I keep thinking around the costs of some of these schemes, and I know, Kylie, that you really struggled with your rebate that you put on that was like a tickle, not even like a real tickle. Libby, yours is 4 cents. Rob, you guys are $5, about that, $4-5. And then I compare and contrast it to CDS, which is like per container anywhere between 4 and 7 cents. Is it? Kind of, I'm just trying to average, but you just kind of go, these schemes cost real amounts of money, and we can't expect to have a scheme that's fully funded. You want the talking stick? Back to Kylie.
This is a huge piece. One of the big challenges we had was originally looking at the levy, like, oh, it's going to be...
Ignore me.
And when you go and talk to a potential member, they're like, oh, but why should I join the scheme? Because I have to pay for recycling anyway. I already pay, you know, for recycling. And I'm like, I can absolutely include recycling in your membership fees. That's no problem. I can get every accredited recycler in Australia to send their invoices to me, and I'll pay them. But then your levy's not $10 a mattress. Your levy's $75 a mattress. And that is just absolutely so far off the cards in this market that it's not even worth talking about. We still have it on the table now that if one of our members has someone who wants recycling included, if they've got accredited recycling near them, I will get them to send their invoices to me and say, no problem, recycling's included for you, if that's what it takes. But we just, you know, that is a big conversation piece that has to happen across the whole industry.
Unless we link the cost of impact at end of life to the material being placed on shelf, how are we going to get design change? How are we going, like, and that's what real eco-modulation is, right? It's actually going, and, you know, if we want to talk packaging and a proper system, and that's, you know, we won't go APCO, but we talk about what's happening overseas with packaging recoverability notes and different eco-modulation, because you bear the cost of it because you prove it's generally recoverable, recyclable, and actually even which facility it went to. And we just aren't thinking on that system shift sufficiently, and we blame infrastructure and we blame tyranny of distance. But hell, we did CDS, and then everyone's complaining that we're not doing enough of it, and now we're thinking about doing our own state-based system, but that's not what our community wants. So why aren't we learning from the complexity of CDS and building on that framework? But then even CDS is not stewardship, it's EPR, because it's not really getting the design changed on that. Like, we've still got Tetra Paks out there pretending it's recoverable. Don't start me on that one today. All right, so just to wrap up, has anyone seen the Green Deal? This is mind-blowing for policy officers. This is how Europe is now operating, right? It is integrated planning and policy based on the fact that we're thinking about prosperity of the planet, lifestyle of the planet, linking all the elements, green jobs, carbon together. And they have policy streams that sit under all of that, right? Including sustainable design, circular economy package, everything else. I do not understand for the life of me, given how many multinationals are domiciled in Europe that import to us, that why we can't have the same standards and requirements as everywhere else. So we talked previously about sending stuff to Asia. We are actually the dumping ground for products and materials that cannot be sold overseas because we are refusing to enter into the regulation conversations. So we still have PFAS on our shelves, despite APCO saying, and sorry Liam, December 2023 they're going to design it out. We're going to have a conversation today and we're going to show you a packager that clearly actually puts material plus PFAS on their website. They're open about it. I don't think that's good enough. You cannot do that overseas, right? We don't even have a labelling scheme that tells us that you're buying something with PFAS in Australia. I think that's wrong, right? So we need to get really vocal as consumers that we want better and we don't want to be the dumping ground, right? These are the standards that we want as well. So on that cheery note, you can go to lunch and you can come back after lunch, and there's 4 sessions. You've got a choice between circular economy, interrelationships or international interrelationships, energy for waste, which has a real place in the hierarchy above landfill while you can continue to put non-recyclable stuff on the shelves. We've all got to stop pretending that all plastic comes in plastic bottles. It's everywhere. And then you get to hang out with me if you've sorted it out to talk PFAS, one of my other favourite subjects. Can you just thank the panel? It was a good conversation. And you know that song that you all have to listen for, and you got to go to one of the 4 locations, and we kick off at 1:20. 1 hour of eating, people, and no food waste. I don't want to see any food waste.